Welcome to the Peaceful Presence Podcast, where tranquility meets transformation. If you find yourself dealing with constant busyness and distractions, or just feelings of being stuck and overwhelmed, you're not alone. This is your space to reconnect with God and discover the peace, purpose, and power that's within us all. Join us on a journey to inner serenity and spiritual renewal. Welcome to the Peaceful Presence Podcast. Welcome to today's episode of the Peaceful Presence Podcast. And I am really excited for you to hear from my special guest today, Rob Odaat. I stumbled across one of Rob's videos online where he spoke openly about his 6-year struggle with a gambling addiction. Rob is now in recovery and passionately speaks about the concept of delayed gratification. And I was really moved and inspired by his insights at a time where I think we have all gotten so accustomed to instant gratification. I think the art of patience and stillness seems to be something of the past, but it's something that I think we all need to learn to cultivate again. And so, without further ado, let's dive into the conversation and welcome Rob. So, welcome and thank you again for taking time out of your day to speak with me and my audience and share your story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. And
Yeah.
before we dive too far into this concept of delayed gratification, I just do want to say it's been something that's been a work in progress for me. As we speak and dive deep into the concept, I don't want people to think that I have it all figured out because no one does. But it's been night and day between how things used to be and how they are today. And while it's still improving every day, I'm living a much better life than I could have ever imagined. And I'm really excited to share it with you.
Well, I think it's wonderful that you even speak to that because I think we all, whatever thing that we are trying to master, it's never going to be perfect. You know, we just do a little bit of our best each day, and slowly but surely we work to perfect things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe start with taking us back. It was a 6-year addiction. You're now a year and a half into recovery. So take us back, 7, 8 years. What was going on?
Yeah.
Share a little bit of your story.
So it probably runs deeper than where I will start, but I think back to when I was 18 years old and I got involved with daily fantasy sports because that's where it formally got started. We like to draw a line between commercialized gambling and gambling because I was 12 years old arguing with my friends at the wiffle ball field about the rules of the game. But when I was 18, I took my first foray into betting money to try to win more money. And that was because I grew up near the Philadelphia area, and every single event that we had, whether it was hanging out with friends or having a family party, it was centered around some kind of professional sports game. So it was hanging out with my friends on a Wednesday night at 7, because that's when the Sixers game tipped off. Or it was a family barbecue that started at 1 o'clock on a Sunday, because that's when the Eagles game kicked off. It was constantly present. And so this idea when I was 18 that I could make money doing something that was already such a strong aspect of my life, it was a no-brainer for me that I was going to get involved. Very quickly, that spiraled into regular sports betting, which would ignite the real issues that would develop over the next few years. It started off with me betting with a bookie, someone I went to school with in early college. And then it turned into betting with the commercialized apps like the FanDuels and DraftKings of the world. I was gambling every single day for about 8 hours a day for what would turn into a 6-year battle with this addiction. It wasn't until I had seen the ups and downs play out 6 different times that it finally clicked that gambling might be the problem. And that sounds absurd to say looking back on it, because anyone looking at it logically would think he lost all his money, he must know it's because of gambling. But over that 6-year period, I made so many excuses. I did mental gymnastics to the point where it was not gambling is bad, but I am bad at gambling. And once that was in my head, that was enough to convince me that I could improve at it, that I could get better if I just learned the right way to do it, which was
That's
a
a
false
great,
belief that I
yeah,
carried for 6 years.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that was 6 years of ups and downs emotionally, financially, spiritually, which we'll dive into a little bit later, I'm sure. But there were 6 different times where I was in debt to the point that I had to work a second job. And these jobs ranged from everything from working as a host at Applebee's to the last time around being a bartender in addition to working as a financial analyst, which is an ironic position to have as a problem gambler, admittedly. But yeah, it took 6 years of those ups and downs before I finally got myself into group meetings and really followed through on my recovery. And what made the real difference for me was finding meaning in my recovery outside of just counting the days. Because I had been going to meetings after the fifth time I put myself in a bad situation, but I was just kind of passing time aimlessly. And the meaning that I did eventually find after a relapse was creating content, sharing my story to help other people avoid making the same mistakes that I did. And it's taken off to the point now where I'm able to reach 16 to 18 million people a month sharing my story.
That's amazing. And I don't know if you have insight, but going back to the struggle with it, what do you think was the driving force for you? What made it so exciting for you?
You know, a lot of the 12-step groups will tell you that you don't need to know why you're doing it. You just need to know how to stop. And I don't agree with that. I do think that it's very important to think back to the roots of the problem
Mhm.
because then you avoid switching into another problem, like a co-occurring addiction, or just, delaying the inevitable, like I did, kicking the can down the road. I think for me, it was a sense of competition and a search for meaning.
Mm.
It was a way for me to stay involved with the thing that I perceived myself to have loved, which was watching sports and that connection that I held with my social circles, in addition to trying to be the best at it and getting rich doing it. And so when I stacked all those things together, it was just a clear goal of win as much money as possible, being the best gambler that you can be. And outside of that, I didn't really have a goal. So
Mhm.
it served as my purpose in life. And that's
Mhm.
what eventually, what would lead me to do it over and over again, expecting a different result.
And then what would you say made you switch? So now it's like you want to find purpose outside of gambling. What was that turning point in your life that made you be able to seek help and stick to it?
In short, I had my ass beat too many times, to be honest. When you go through the ups and downs and it's pretty much the same problem playing out, eventually, each time it happens, there's a different reason in your mind. And eventually you get to the truth going through it enough times. But I don't like that as a solution for everyone because that means you have to hit rock bottom before you seek out any kind of help. And
Mhm.
so, what really switched things up and changed my mindset was when I stopped making it all about myself. I had relationships and friendships that I lost due to gambling. And in the moment, I didn't really care. But
Mhm.
when I realized one day that sharing my story actually could help someone else not feel these terrible emotions that I had, that was a driving force in really getting me to stick to my recovery because now I wasn't just doing it for myself, which is very, very important and required, in my opinion, but I was doing it to hold up a community and to help people out that were going through the same thing as me. And that doesn't mean you have to share your story with millions of people online to succeed in recovery, but that's what I think the power of a recovery community is, whether that's 3 people in a back room of a church on a Tuesday night or 3 million people on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think they say sometimes that the opposite of addiction is connection, and so whether it's to one person or to many, having that connection with people and helping them obviously is a catalyst to keeping you in recovery and sustaining it. So, how have your relationships changed since you've been in recovery now, going back to with your family, your friends, even yourself?
Mm. Honestly, I've been able to have relationships that are real. Before I mean, I always had friends, always had relationships going on, but they were kind of secondary.
Mm.
Whereas now, any kind of friendship or relationship, if I'm with that person, I can actually be there with that person. If I was out on a date with my girlfriend at the time that I was gambling and I saw maybe a TV in the back of the restaurant with a game on it, I was going to be more interested in that TV than hearing about her day.
Right.
And if I was out at a bar or even a party with friends in college, I'd sneak off to the bathroom and place bets or check on scores. And the compulsion just took over my life in a way that I didn't care about anyone else if I didn't have the bandwidth for it that night. So I
Right.
think that now that I'm not constantly adding stress to my life, I'm able to sustain relationships, ride the ups and downs of friendships and relationships that are naturally going to occur, and actually care about fixing the problem, which I just did not do before.
I love that. And I listened to one of your videos, and you referenced in there going through recovery. It may not always be fun or exciting, but there is a peace instead of this constant stress that you just spoke about. And that's kind of what I try to do on this podcast, is cultivate. Yes, it's spiritual and connecting people, for me, for God, but in this case, it's also just about learning to have a peaceful presence, and because life is always going to have its ups and downs, and that's just part of life. So learning how to be okay with where you're at, and be present, be still, and carry that core sense of peace, I think, is just paramount. Um,
It kind of leads
so,
me,
uh,
oh, could I jump in right there? It kind
yeah.
of leads me into why I do the content that I do.
Hmm.
A lot of times people aren't met where they're at when it comes to their recovery. So with gambling specifically, we look at the 12-step program, which worked for me, but it's abstinence, it's all or nothing. And so a lot of times when people are just in the early stages of experiencing problems, they're not ready to fully give something up. And if they
Right.
see their only solutions are everything or nothing, they're going to keep going. And
Mhm.
so meeting people where they're at and being present is a major part of my content, because for a long time I thought I was the only gambling addict on earth. And then I went to a meeting and I realized I'm not. But until I got to that point, I felt completely alone. And so I seek to reach people where they're at and create that present moment thought process of, maybe this is something I should start to look at, because maybe it could become a problem for me.
I love that. You're absolutely right. Like, going from one extreme to the other isn't, it doesn't work,
Not
always, but
marketable.
yeah. And it's like tuning the dial just a little bit more towards not gambling, finding other activities that take that place, that are healthier options for you. So, I'm picturing you at dinner with your girlfriend, and you got something going on the TV. How did you change that? That's got to be very hard after, being stuck in that habit for so long. Tell us what you did to be present and not have that urge to look.
So this is a topic that comes up a lot, and it's, does having a relationship right after you try to quit, in this case, gambling, is that going to help you or hurt you? And in my case, I didn't have a relationship for the first year that I had quit gambling. And it wasn't intentional, but that period of time was what gave me the chance to adapt my habits. Because during that period of time, stopped watching sports so much. I tried to pick up other things to do with my time. I wasn't fully there. I didn't, exactly succeed in my recovery at that point, but the process was beginning of a lifestyle shift. And so some people will say, maybe I should get a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because then that will distract me. I think that's a very dangerous game to play, because you might not be ready, as you just alluded to support that person and be present in that relationship right off the bat. And for me, it was having that time of about 8 or 9 months in between relationships where I was in recovery, that I worked on things. And had I jumped right into something else, I'm sure that the relationship would have been a fraction of what it is today that I have with my girlfriend.
Right. So you speak of delayed gratification. I love that term. And going back to what I said at the beginning, we are in a day and age where everything is instant, groceries, whatever you want to buy, your phone, everything is coming at you from different directions all the time. Maybe you can explain, what is delayed gratification, and how have you been able to apply that in your life?
Yeah. So delayed gratification is finding pleasure in things that don't immediately gratify you. So that sucks to use the word in the description of the word, but um, so essentially something that's delayed gratification would be going to the gym every day, because you know that after going to the gym for 6 months, you're going to be a healthier person and you're going to have better cardiovascular system, and you'll be able to enjoy your life more. You'll have a higher quality of life if you're healthy. Example of instant gratification would be having a slice of pizza, because it tastes great and it gives you pleasure in your brain and you feel good, but then you deal with the consequences later on. And gambling is the peak of instant gratification. And for a gambling addict, it's crazy how much you seek to make what is instant gratification for someone else faster. So for me, when I started with sports betting, it was fun, but then it wasn't fun enough. And I had to do betting on halves and quarters. Then that was too slow. So I was betting on the first pitch or the first basket of games. Too slow again. And I moved to slot machines. And that progression is, it's a progression. It gets progressively worse for a problem gambler. So to switch to a mindset of I will do something in the present moment that won't bring immediate pleasure was the most difficult mindset shift for me coming out of a gambling addiction. But the way that I've kind of sought to do it is I actually seek out things in my life that I don't like to do. And I think about why I don't like to do them, not things I fear, but things that are not necessarily enjoyable, like running, like getting up early, like journaling, things that don't necessarily bring me pleasure in the moment, like gambling did. But these things stacked up over time are what has kept me away from the habits that before were tearing me down. So delaying gratification really just means it doesn't have to happen right now. Think about yourself tomorrow instead of yourself today.
So what made you be able to switch to this? Because uh, I mean, obviously, you wanted to quit the gambling, but there had to be such a drive in you to say, "I want to stop," to where I'm welcoming this new delayed gratification into my life. Um,
Yeah.
what was it, or do you have any concept as to what that was that really drove you to say, "I'm ready. I'm ready to stop"?
Yeah, I remember reading the exact book that kind of put this mindset in me was Atomic Habits by James Clear. And he was talking about how if you want to form a positive habit, you have to make it really easy to do, really easy to replicate, and something you can do every day. And the opposite for kicking a bad habit. But this book kind of was the first time that I thought about building foundational building blocks in my life of positive things. But again, it goes back to what I said right at the beginning, right? It wasn't clean cut. It wasn't that I snapped my finger and I was a monk who could wait a month before he felt happy, right? It was that I dealt with discomfort. I dealt with boredom. I dealt with knowing it was going to suck because developed the belief incrementally that in the long run, this will be better for me. And that doesn't mean it was fun because it
Right.
most certainly is not, but it led to the situation that I'm in now, where I'm able to sustain my life full time making content. I'm able to help people every day. I'm in decent shape, still need to get in better shape physically, but mentally, I'm in a much better place than I've ever been. And this is all the result of putting in the work over the last 2 years, every single day, even if those days weren't that enjoyable.
Right. And so, what activities did you find yourself, maybe even in the beginning or even now, filling your time with?
Sure. So there's the things that, every fitness influencer would tell you to fill your time with, like going to the gym, hot yoga, journaling, meditating, these things. And I certainly did them. But what I came to find was that content creation was something I was really passionate about. And so my day, the focus of my day is, at first it was just to keep myself busy. But as time would go on, it changed from busyness to meaning. And I didn't find meaning in this at first, which is what I really want to express. When I first started making content, it sucked. The video sucked. You could tell it sucked. And I was robotic. I was not really engaged. I wasn't emotionally invested in it. But that was because I was healing from my addiction. And I just stuck with it. That's the point I want to get across. No matter what you do, as long as it's not another addiction and you're sticking with it, if you're in recovery or you're recovering, it will get incrementally more enjoyable. The better you get at it and the more invested you get at it. But
Yeah.
that's delayed gratification. You gotta keep going, even if it's not so great up front. So
Right.
I've done the influencer type activities. I do love hot yoga. I'm a proponent, but really it's just finding something to do every day that you can see growing into something.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you touched on it, and I think that's where motivation comes from, is something emotionally meaningful. And when you find what that is, whatever area in your life that it is what I think makes people go in a certain direction one way or the other. There's this analogy that I've heard before, and it's if you took an axe to a tree and you hit that axe against the tree 5 times. Have you heard this?
I
Nothing's
think I
going
know
to
where you're
happen.
going.
Yeah, nothing's going to happen day 1, day 2, day 10. But if you consistently, knock at that tree, every day, obviously, one day that tree will come down. So it's kind of the same concept of, little by little, and you eventually, conquer what you're trying to accomplish.
Along that same analogy, I heard another one. It was that if I had 24 hours to chop down a tree, I would spend the first 23 sharpening my axe.
Mm,
So building yourself
love
up in general, working on yourself and thinking about how you can be better regardless of your day-to-day results puts you in the best position to perform at whatever it is you do aspire to do when you get there.
yeah, and working on your skills to be able to do that. Um, we had talked a little bit beforehand about any spiritual connection, and you said, prior to your recovery, there was a lack of that, and maybe it's something that you've been trying to incorporate a little bit more into your life. Do you want to touch on that for us a little
Yeah.
bit?
So it was when I was a freshman in high school. So to back up even further, we're not a very religious family. We don't have a strong spiritual presence. Growing up, we didn't have one. And I remember that I guess if we did go to a formalized church, it would have been a Catholic church.
Mhm.
And I remember my dad's mom, my grandmother, she got very sick very suddenly. It ended up being a very rare blood disease. And I was 13 or 14 years old. And basically, over the course of 3 days, she went from being perfectly healthy to passing away. And the night before she passed away was the very first time that I prayed. And at that time, my impression of prayer was that if I ask for something and I'm a good guy, I will get it.
Yeah.
Which once she passed away, I figured, well, that proves it. God's not real. There's nothing here for me.
Yeah.
It was a lie. And that lack of spirituality, I wouldn't say it was a direct reason that I ended up getting my addiction, but it wasn't an avenue that I felt I could pursue in my recovery. And so perhaps it limited my recovery to feeling a spiritual connection to my support group, which sounds a little hokey, to be honest.
Mhm.
And that's okay. Some people, that's how they feel, and it's what gets them through. For me, it was really the routine of things. But now I'm not saying that I have become a spiritual person, but I'm recognizing that prayer in itself is not just a wish list on Christmas, and that it's more about building your connection to whatever your higher power might be. I still wouldn't say I have a formalized version of that, but I'm no longer a non-believer in the possibility, I would say.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely value, regardless of which religion you believe is the one you would like to follow. There's value in community. And
Yeah.
the idea of shared values and beliefs is something that can provide that. So who knows where I'll be in 5 years, but it shifted drastically from that night in, I guess that was 2014.
Well, you don't know me or a little bit of any of my story, but over the last, I lost my sister in October this last year. And prior to that, she was diagnosed with cancer, kind of along the same lines as you. I mean, at the beginning of her diagnosis, it was dire, it did not look good. We rallied, a whole group of us came together, and I'm a big group, and prayed, and she turned around really quickly, and we had a really great 2 years. And in fact, the night before she passed away, I remember, I mean, she wasn't doing very good at the end, but I remember actually coming home and thanking God that night. Like I could tell we were turning a corner, but sometimes before somebody passes away, they have a really good day. And that's what we had. So the next morning when I went to see her, it was a horrible day, and it was really the only one horrible day that we had. And I felt the same way to some degree, because we had been praying, I was believing, I was being grateful and thankful the night before she passed of we're turning a corner, we're going to have this amazing testimony. And when it didn't go the way I thought, it was just like the rug had been pulled out from underneath me, and I felt so confused. And ironically, I thought maybe this would make me mad. It kind of made me want to dig in deeper. And it's about finding meaning. I don't feel like the story is over yet. And when you talked about community, I'm not
sometimes I think religion got a lot of us into trouble to begin with, but just the community is what it's about, but I do believe everything is in its spiritual form first before it manifests in the physical, and having this sense of community, that is us connecting to I call it God, because we're all a piece of that puzzle, and I think you're doing it in your own way, and you're doing it beautifully.
I
So,
appreciate it. And sorry
yeah.
for your loss. I did not know
Yeah,
that before
me
we
me
started.
too. Me too. But we're going to use it to I don't know, it's taught me a lot, and even though she may not physically be here, I still feel her presence, and I still will carry on her story and take, whatever I've learned through that journey on to hopefully influence others and help others as well.
Amazing.
So maybe just kind of to wrap up a little bit, what advice would you give, to somebody that would be maybe facing addiction challenges of any sort? What tips or tools would you recommend for them?
Yeah. So first, let's draw a line in the sand there and say that anyone can develop a gambling addiction, even if it's your first time gambling, even if you are young and you think that you can't develop one. So just always be mindful of what you're doing, because for me, it stopped being fun after about a year or two, and I kept going for 4 more years out of sheer habit and competitiveness. So if you're finding that it's not fun, it should be done. Now, if you know that you're done gambling, you want to stop gambling, the very first thing, as we touched on throughout this podcast, is to find a sense of community. And the way that I found mine was through a 12-step program, which for some reason doesn't do advertising. However, I'm hoping that we can start to change that a little bit as time goes on. But basically, just know that you're not alone. And when it comes to a gambling addiction, the resources out there might be harder to find at first if you're not familiar with them than, say, a substance use problem. And again, I'm hoping to be a part of the change on that. But I would say that thinking that you can do it all alone is the exact thing that got you into this situation to start. I figured I could quit gambling by myself, and that was my ego speaking out, trying to keep me in it. Yeah, like I'll quit by myself. I'll quit after I win this. I'll quit after this day. Just kept moving the goalpost and I kept going, even though I wasn't enjoying it. So if you've ever thought to yourself, maybe this is a problem, that's the exact time to seek help. And if you don't know where to look to find help, come and check out my account. It's exactly what I'm trying to do.
I love it. And to me, that is spirituality in and of itself, is being able to realize we're not meant to do all of this alone, whatever
Mm.
it is in our lives. We are meant to have people and a community around us, and we're in it together. So
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, I do want to leave your link below. And, if anybody is interested in learning more about your story or resources for help, we'll have that information below. And again, I just really want to thank you for your time and for your willingness to share your story. I believe you're helping so many people. And I just also want to comment. I love your presence. You're very, very
Thank you.
calm, and so I don't know if that's different from where it was in the gambling days. I
Oh,
would
it was
imagine it is.
very different from where it was in the gambling days, but you know what? I was always a decent speaker, but before I wasn't speaking for a good reason. I
Mm,
was speaking to convince others that what I was doing was a good thing, or convince others to give me money, like basically just being a fraudster or a scammer
yeah.
within the bounds of the law, I guess. But now I'm hoping to use that persuasiveness to help people help themselves. So I really do appreciate you having me and for the kind words you've said.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on the right track. So, well, thank you again. And we will share your information below for anybody that wants to check out your information and your videos. So, thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you found it meaningful and insightful. Don't forget to share, subscribe, like, or follow to stay connected and updated on future episodes. I hope you will join me on the next episode of the Peaceful Presence podcast. Until then, may you find ways to reconnect within and with God and develop your own peaceful presence in your everyday life.